when you look at audience for those films, is the approach to, make a film that has that Canadian, but always to have that international audience in mind?
It depends on the scale of the film. I would say that in our national fund, which tend to be the films budgeted at well over $5 million, an international sensibility is generally very important. In the smaller films, it's totally legitimate to produce a film that is primarily of interest to Canadians. But what you find in looking at not only Canadian films, but independent films from all over the world, is that there's many films that are firmly rooted in their home country, and yet they appeal greatly to people from all over the world. And that's actually one secret of success in filmmaking, is to make something that's very honest, that's very representative of things that you know, very representative of true human emotion, and then people will respond whether the film is set in Canada or Ireland or any other country.
A lot of producers we talked to also talked about the challenge of, competing with being so close to our southern neighbor with such, a strong Hollywood machine and occupying a majority of our screens. Do you see that as, we're competing with American cinema, or is that we just haven't found our own, distinct, commodifiable viewpoint? It's commercial from our own perspective.
In terms of what films Canadian films are competing with, we're competing with independent cinema from all over the world. So I don't think that Canadian films are competing with Batman or Lord of the Rings, that kind of film. We don't have those kind of budgets. However, we are competing with the best of independent cinema from all over the world. And I think if you compare and you really look at the Canadian films over the last few years, both French and English, you'll see that Canadian films have a higher level of visibility than ever. We've had Blindness, for example, which was an official co-production opening the Cannes Film Festival. We've had Eastern Promises and Away From Her in the same year being nominated for Academy Awards. Canadian films are achieving a lot of success.
Critical success.
Critical and box office
Is it
success.
climbing in box office?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Canadian box office, on an individual basis, the news is good. On a collective basis, like American films or independent films from other countries, there are more films which do not attract a significant box office than what we call the breakout films that do attract a significant box office.
Yeah.
That's just the reality.
Because I feel like we still haven't cracked that stratosphere. Like if you look at a couple of years ago, you have Bon Cop, Bad Cop, great example, but I think it garnered 80% of what we did for box office with that one film, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think that's a shining example. Yeah. But part of, I think, comparing it to that Hollywood system is that in Canada, I was talking to a couple young filmmakers from CFC, and they said, we have a system here where we can only produce so many films, and a percentage of those are going to be really strong. But when you have a smaller grouping, the impression is that there's not as many great films. Whereas the American system, for every 100 films, you can have one hit, and that overshadows it. So here we have so much more pressure on us.
Yeah. Well, it's true. There's a smaller pool of Canadian films. There's no doubt. However, it's not minuscule. There are at least 12 movies opening every Friday, and of those 12 movies that open every Friday on Canadian screens, not more than one of them is Canadian. In fact, the real statistic would be more like one every 2 weeks. So there's an awful lot of competition for screen time and competition for audience attention. When a film breaks, it tends to break very, very well, like a Bon Cop, Bad Cop, or like a Passchendaele. And when a film bombs, it tends to bomb really badly, unfortunately, and do maybe $10 or $20 or $30,000 at the box office. However, there's a really interesting phenomena, which is many films that do not perform that well at the box office end up getting marketed to the extent that there is a want-to-see factor. It's just that people don't come to see it that first weekend at the theater. What they're doing is they're waiting to see it on DVD or on iTunes or through some other means. And so what we need to do is really track how we're doing with attracting Canadian eyeballs as well as eyeballs from all around the world on our films, not only on the theater screens, but also on other means of seeing films.